Welcome back for another great project here on the Woodsmith Shop. You know, you can enjoy a meal outside with nothing more than a picnic table and a grill, but you can add even more friends and family if you have the right equipment to go with it. And that's what we're doing on today's show. We're going to build this outdoor entertainment center, we're calling it, and it features a really wide and long prep surface. So now you have a place to set out all your gear and the food, and it's not going to get in the way. There's even a raised countertop in the back here for entertaining guests while you're preparing. And then down below, don't forget the need for storage. There are 2 enclosed cabinets behind doors here, and then a middle one where you can tuck an outdoor refrigerator maybe, or a cooler with some drinks in it, and you'll be ready for your next get-together. The construction on this is pretty simple, as you'll see. We're going to use a lot of long metal fasteners and pocket screws to get this put together. Miter saw is a great tool for building a project like this, but you want to get it set up into a good cutting station. I have a stack of parts that I need to cut, and then an open area to keep my parts organized after I've finished cutting them. You'll see that the cart that I have the miter saw attached to has extended wings to be able to support long parts. And then when I need to make a lot of parts that are exactly the same length, I'm going to clamp a stop in place on the fence. Here I'm just using a wooden hand screw. It's really easy to attach to the fence, and I can position it really quickly. So I'll cut all of the leg posts that I need for this project to their final length. Make sure you have all the parts that you need. Then I'll reposition the stop block in order to cut the taller back legs. These are going to support the countertop later on. 4x4 pieces work great for some of the really sturdy pieces that we need in this project. But there are some pieces that need to be just a little bit smaller. For that, I'm just going to go over to the bandsaw and make a few cuts to resaw those into slightly narrower parts. Kind of think of the bandsaw as a little bit of a lumber mill where you can take bigger pieces and turn them into the smaller parts that you need without having to glue up pieces later on. Well, here's the skeleton of our entertainment center all put together. Now, I started by assembling the 2 end pieces here using those big long timber connecting screws. After driving those in place, then the smaller supports can get put in with the pocket screws. Then to connect the long ones, I put the lower beam in and then had a long clamp that I was able to pull everything together with in order to drive those screws in. And then the upper rail and then the backsplash panel as well. Those just go in with pocket screws. Make sure when you're attaching these inner supports that they're square so you have a nice uniform size opening. So what's left now? Well, now I'm going to turn this over to Chris, and he's going to fill out the skeleton with some of the panels and doors that are going to go in here, and then we'll wrap things up with a countertop.
With the frame of our outdoor entertainment center all done, it's time to think about cladding it. What we want to do is put a nice skin on the outside and also to define the interior spaces. Now to do that, I've added some 2x2s. There's a 2x2 along this back edge. I've got 2 pieces to support a bottom on each of these end compartments, and I've added a piece here on this rail which will help support our side. Now the sides and the back are made out of T111, which is a fantastic outdoor material for this project. One thing I've done to be a little bit careful is that I've made sure to center the grooves so that the panel is symmetric. And so equal distances, both sides. Now to attach all these panels, I'm going to apply some exterior grade adhesive here and here. Now mastic would be great. I've also got some just good type 3 exterior glue, and that's what I'm going to use. And get it on before it drips. There we go. And then I'm going to reinforce it with a few nails. So I've added these two panels, which define the space for our refrigerator and define the storage areas on either end of our project. Now, I've also added a bottom to each area, and my 2x2 cleating was already in place for that, so that was easy. I did have to do a little notching though. I then next added some cleating for a small shelf. Once again, I had to do a little bit of notching. Pretty easy though. So, we've got our structure in place, we've got it skinned, it's all defined. I think we're ready to think about a countertop and details now.
So our outdoor entertainment center needs some form of top on it. Now, in the plans, we show that being a tile top, and that works great. But you have a bunch of different options here. You could do a hardwood top, something like cedar, and that would look great, but it would need regular maintenance. Or you could do something like a synthetic decking, or maybe even a marble countertop. But what I'm going to do today is a little bit different. We're going to do a poured concrete countertop. It's a kind of a fun technique, and it's going to last really well outside. So to do our concrete countertop, we need to start with a form. So I have this piece of laminate covered particle board that we're going to make a form out of. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut it down to a rough size. Then we're going to head over to the table saw. What I'll do there is cut strips that's going to form the edges of the form, and then I'll cut the bottom of the form. All right, so that completes the basic form on this. Now, as I said, we're pouring this as a rectangular countertop. But if you were going to plan on doing something like a sink, you could include that in the form so you're not pouring that area and have to cut it out later. So at this point, I have everything screwed together, and I've screwed it about every 7 or 8 inches or so. This doesn't have to be super tight as if we were doing something like epoxy that could leak out. The concrete has a lot of bulk there, so it's not going to seep out necessarily. But we do want to come back with some silicone caulk now and seal up the edges. We want to avoid any of that moisture seeping out if we can. Plus, this is actually the surface that's going to become the top. So by caulking the edges and adding a small radius with our fingertip or with the end of the caulk gun, we can go ahead and round over the corners of the concrete countertop. Okay, once I get all the joints done, I'm going to come back with a little glass of water and just stick my finger in there and smooth out these joints. By doing this, I'm taking away any radius that's left on the top, and I'm actually creating a nice, smooth, what will end up being a round over on the finished countertop. Okay, with everything smoothed out, I'm gonna let this cure for 35, 40 minutes, and in the meantime, I'm gonna start mixing some concrete. All right, so the concrete that we're gonna use for this countertop is a mix that is designed specifically for counters. That means it has a polymer added, so it's gonna flow a little bit easier, and it is a little bit lighter weight. So what I have here is a pair of buckets and my water. Now we're gonna mix this based on the manufacturer's recommendations on it, which is about 16 cups per bag of concrete. Now I'm expecting this to take several bags, and I'm gonna mix this in smaller batches at a time, just kind of working it together till it starts to absorb the water, then I'll add a little bit more. Now it is important to make sure that this is really, really mixed well. We don't want any dry spots in the finished countertop. And as I am pouring this, we are going to add a little bit of reinforcement into this slab. What I'm going to use are these pieces of fiberglass rebar. Now this is because this countertop is going to be floating over a couple of cabinets. Unlike a slab that you might have for your shed or for your driveway that's sitting on a bed of gravel, this has no support underneath it. So we want to add a little bit of tensile strength with that rebar. So once I get this thing about halfway filled up, I'm going to embed that rebar into the concrete and then top it off. Okay, so that's quite a bit of mixing, and if you're doing a bunch of these, or heck, even if you're doing these two, renting a little concrete mixer would really speed this process up. But now that I have this all poured, the rebar is in there, now it's time just to let it set up. And what I've done is, it's been sitting here for about 30 minutes or so, and the excess moisture has started to rise to the surface. And I went ahead and taken a hardwood float and just floated over the top to kind of smooth it out. Now, as I mentioned, the bottom side is what is planned to be the top. But just in case once we flip it over, there is a void or something like that on that bottom side, I have an option of keeping this super smooth and using this as a surface as well. So as this firms up, it's easy to kind of just frost it like a cake, nice, smooth, light motions, and you can get a really smooth surface. Now, this is gonna cure for about 24 hours before we pop those forms off and see what we got.
Okay, we're kind of at a halfway point on our outdoor entertainment project here, and I kind of want to review exactly where we are to this point. Logan got the main countertop poured, and concrete adds kind of a fun little element to this woodworking project, and it's going to be a nice outdoor surface. Now, after allowing the concrete to cure for 24 hours, he came back and loosened the screws on the form that he made and then started peeling off the sides. And then with the help of John Doyle, our assistant here, he got the countertop flipped over and you can see what our surface looks like. We still have a little bit of moisture here from a piece that was setting on it, and there are a few little bubbles and holes there, but I think it adds a nice texture, and this is going to be a really nice project for being outside. The narrower section is just on the workbench over there. There's a few things that we have to take care of though. So what's next? Well, what we want to do is attach the corbels that Chris made earlier to help support that other section of concrete. They get screwed to this back piece here, and then you'll notice there's a gap between the countertop and the back, so we're going to add a valance here as well, and I'm going to show you how to take care of that. And then up front, the two compartments that enclose all of our storage, I want to add some doors and hinges on that to just present a nice finished face for it. And then there are a few other cleanup things like plugging screw holes, and we'll get to the process for how to do all that. And then wrap things up with some paint and finish. So let's get started on attaching these corbels. Now, even though there are 4 corbels, they're not all attached the same way. I'm going to get started with the ones that are mounted to the 2 end posts here. What we're going to do is drive a long lag screw through the post into the corbel from one direction. Then on the other side, we'll come in through the corbel into the post with a shorter deck screw. So our work starts by drilling a counterbore here to recess the head of the lag screw. And you'll do that with a Forstner bit in a hand drill and drive it in about 1 inch. The Forstner bit leaves a little dimple, and you can use that as a guide for drilling the shank hole for the threads of the lag screw and go all the way through there. What we'll have to do then is mark the location where the lag screw comes out, drill a pilot hole in the back side of the corbel, and then we can lock that in place. Now the middle 2 corbels have just a slight variation on how they're attached. I'm going to use a long connector screw that will go through this back apron and into the corbel. And then just like the other ones, I'm going to use a deck screw that goes through the corbel into the apron. The process here is pretty simple. I'm going to drill a shallow counterbore for the head of that screw. And because the screw has self-tapping threads, I can hold the corbel in place and then just drive it in. The next item on our punch list is to fill in the space between the countertop and this rear apron. And we did that by adding a thick valance piece, I guess we'll call it. And we made it out of the cedar so that it blends in with the rest of the project. The big thing here is that we wanted the front edge to be flush with these back posts. That way, when the countertop is up against it, we have a continuous surface running all the way down. In order to do that, we added some spacers along the back, and then where necessary, slipped in a few shims too in order to get that smooth surface. We'll cut those flush in preparation for attaching and installing the countertop on this back portion here. I have a piece here that's left over from cutting our post to length because I'm going to use that to make the plugs that will cover the screw holes. That way the plugs are going to match. I mean, you don't really need them to match. You could use a contrasting material. Then you're going to draw attention to those plugs and they become accents, kind of punctuation marks on the project. But in order to do that, we need to create those plugs that have a really snug fit. So I have a pretty big plug cutter installed in the drill press, and that's the way to go here to be able to get the most control. So I have a 3/4 inch plug cutter here installed in the drill press. That's not one that you're typically going to find, but they are pretty easy to get. Now, what I've done is set up the drill press and a stop for the correct depth, and I'm also using the fence here to help control the workpiece. I'm going to just create a row of plugs down one side, then I can flip the board around and create a row on the opposite edge. And you want to cut way more than you need. That way you can line up the grain a little bit easier, and there's probably going to be a likelihood that one or two of them are going to break at just the wrong place. When I'm done, I'm going to switch it out for a 3/8 inch plug cutter, much smaller, to be able to cover the screw holes that attach the corbels to the back of the project. The usual next step here, after you've created a whole mess of plugs, is to grab a screwdriver and start prying them out. However, especially on this soft cedar, the screwdriver can end up dinging up the sides of the plug, and that's going to show up as a noticeable gap when you glue those plugs in place. Instead, I've set up the bandsaw here to essentially just resaw them off. Now the problem is, as you can imagine, with all of these plugs suddenly getting cut free, it's like a game of 52 pickup. There's going to be plugs all over the place. So the solution is to grab a roll of masking tape. Run a strip of it over the top of the plugs. Now when I cut them free, they're going to stick to the masking tape. When I need to use them, I can just peel it up a little at a time, grab the plug, and glue it in place. Now, installing the plugs is really a two-step operation. First thing that I'm going to do is peel away the tape here and get a couple of plugs out. Then I'm going to use a glue brush to apply glue to the inside of the counter bore. About the only thing that you have to watch out for here is making sure that the grain orientation on the plug and the workpiece are more or less the same. You press it in as far as you can go. If you need to, tap it in. I'm going to let that set up for a little bit and then come back and pair it flush with a chisel. All right, I said that I was going to be talking about the paint and finish here, but instead there are a couple of things that I need to take care of in order to get the doors wrapped up. Now we have some nice big openings here. Seems like the doors are going to be pretty straightforward. However, a couple of things were nagging at me. First off, the door is designed to stop against the bottom shelf here, and then a couple of stops that we put in on the side. However, that bottom shelf is plywood, and those bare plywood edges are just kind of glaring right now. Instead, what I want to do is just cut a thin strip of cedar that matches the rest of this, and I'm going to run a bead of glue here. Stick that in place. I'll tack it in with some nails here and just kind of pretty it up a little bit. The next thing, like I alluded to already, is to cut a pair of stops from our cedar pieces that we have and install those here. Again, I'll just pin them in place with some glue and some brads as well. That gets us ready for the door itself. Now, the door pretty straightforward. It's a slab panel door, as they call it, made out of that same T111 that we've used on the rest of the project here, and cut it to fit its opening, leaving a little bit of a gap there because this is going to live outside. Now, the one thing that you want to do when you're cutting this over at the table saw is pay attention to the arrangement of these panel details on the exterior face. You'll notice that I cut it so that I have a symmetrical look on each side here. So you're going to have to watch that and measure your openings carefully when you make those cuts. All right, we're getting the doors installed on our grilling center here, and one of the things is that since this is going to be outside, we really want these doors locked down so that they're going to operate smoothly over its entire life. So the ones that we're using, you can see down here, are pretty interesting. They have a wraparound design where it attaches to the grilling center. It attaches right to those stops. You can actually add another screw on the inside. And then you can also see how the door part cradles the door from underneath. Same thing's going on up at the top of the door for the upper hinge. And what that means is now that the door is pinched in place, so there's no sag or droop in the hinge mechanism, and it's going to operate smoothly. Next thing that we need to do is install the pull on the front of the door. The big thing here is that we want the pull, especially since it's so wide, to make sure that it's nice and level on the front, and then also located top to bottom and side to side centered. My solution for doing that is to use a drilling guide like this. All I need to do for the door for layout is to mark a center line on the top of the door. There's a movable fence and a notch on there, so I can just line it up with the center line here. And this fence will control how far up and down the pull gets located. You can set that really easily. All right, there you go. After cinching down the screws with a screwdriver, you can see it's installed in the correct position, centered side to side, and at the correct height here. Bar pulls like this are great on a project like that because it's great as a towel rack for use in meal prep as you're going along here. One of the best parts of building a woodworking project like the outdoor entertainment center that we did in today's episode is how easily you can take the plans and customize them to suit your specific need. Now, for example, this center is going to go live over at Logan's place, so he got to choose the paint color, and that's why we decided to go with the concrete countertops. The whole point of it is that not only do you get to build something that you're going to use and enjoy for years to come, but you're going to make it uniquely your own.